Hi, my name is Rachel King, and I will be speaking on Elliot Eisner. Elliot Eisner is a modern thinker within the realm of education. He was a lover of the arts at a very young age, and never let the passion within himself cease. It has driven much of his thinking in relation to education. He is known today primarily for his work in curriculum studies, art education, and educational evaluation. He has benefited the educational system and the arts tremendously. Eisner's childhood. Elliot was born in 1933 to a Jewish-American family and grew up on the west side of Chicago. Early within his education, it was discovered that Eisner was gifted in the arts. His mother supported his talent within her son throughout his schooling. It is written that elementary art classes were where he received acknowledgement, where he was seen as an individual, where uniquely among his school subjects, he consistently joined the elite of A students. It was where his heart sang. Art was also where the young Eisner was bold. In the moment of making art, his identity was secure. In high school, Eisner was described by friends as being one who prioritized soccer and girls above academic studies, yet always had an interest in the arts. He was the typical high school boy, yet managed to never abandon his love of the arts. He recounted that when he was in high school, his heart would rise whenever he entered the Art Institute of Chicago. The friends that he had known so many years were hanging on the walls there. After high school, Eisner went on to pursue further education at Roosevelt University in Chicago, where he earned his BA in art education. During this time, he had his first job as an art educator. He taught to low-income African-American boys in the American Boys Commonwealth, an after-school boys club in the Chicago neighborhood where Eisner had grown up. His students ranged in ages from 7 to 14, and it was in this role that he began to understand his belief as an educator. Eisner discovered he was a progressive and critical theorist. In 1954, Eisner enrolled in the Institute of Design in Chicago. In 1954, he was also awarded an MS in art education from the Institute of Design through the Illinois Institute of Technology. In 1958, he earned an MA in education at the University of Chicago and a PhD in education in 1962. Eisner's career continued following his job with the American Boys Commonwealth, and all the while during his master and doctorate studies. Eisner worked as a high school art teacher in Chicago from 1956 to 1958. He became an art teacher at the University of Chicago in 1958 and worked there until 1960. Following that teaching position, he became an instructor in art education at Ohio State University from 1960 to 1961. He then went back to the University of Chicago and taught education from 1961 to 1965. He became an assistant professor of education at the University of Chicago in 1962. But in 1965, he joined the faculty at Stanford, first as an associate professor of education and art from 1965 to 1970, and then from 1970 as a professor of education and art. Eisner had a great deal of people and events that influenced his educational philosophy and ideas. Philosophically, Dewey had the greatest impact on Eisner. Dewey's book, Art as Experience, has been referenced by Eisner over the decades. Eisner took Dewey's idea of connecting art to everyday affairs and applied it to education. Eisner sees education as something quite artistic and not just an undertaking of social science. Eisner's concept of educational criticism is built off John Dewey's concept of aesthetic experience. Educational criticism is the process of reading the aesthetic quality of schooling, guiding us to see more clearly the thing we are studying. Eisner breaks this concept down into 4 dimensions. They are description, interpretation, evaluation, and thematics. Eisner says of description that it enables readers to visualize what a place or process is like. Interpretation attempts to explain the meaning of what we see and experience. Evaluation is judgment or an appraisal based on criteria which include outside standards, norms, and qualitative changes in student experience. Thematics is analysis or generalizations about reoccurring meanings and pervasive qualities in the lesson or curriculum. Another belief Eisner has that stems from Dewey is that the arts are vehicles through which understanding is enlarged. Eisner has emerged as one of education's most major interpreters of Dewey's aesthetic theories. Eisner explored them for their broader educational utility, and at the same time, he insistently highlighted Dewey's use of the arts as a paradigm for the critical learning that traditionally has been ignored by education. Dewey's ideas aided Eisner in his fight for the importance of the arts in education. Unrelated to Dewey, many other people and things have influenced Eisner. One such thing is the Art Institute of Chicago's permanent art collection, where Eisner frequently gazed upon and considered his friends. These works forced Eisner to reflect. Eisner went on to call the intense emotion of this relationship to art inspired consensorship. Attending the Institute of Design also influenced his educational beliefs. While at school, Eisner became acquainted with the Bauhaus movement. This interaction with the Bauhaus offered Eisner with a model of how the arts and social relevance could be married, as well as how art experience could be richly educative, while flourishing in the realm of the practical and socially functional. This movement provided Eisner with further arguments for the educational centrality of the arts. Eisner's professors and colleagues also influenced him. One such area where they did so was his forming belief in the importance of inquiry within education. 5 teachers who, generally speaking, influenced Eisner include Phil Jackson, Frank Chase, Ben Bloom, Joe Schwab, and John Goodlad. There were a great number of prevalent beliefs while Eisner developed his educational philosophy. Many of his ideas were a reaction to the current educational beliefs at the time. 2 movements in full swing within education were the objective movement and scientism. Scientism was the belief that the scientific method is the only route to worthwhile knowledge. Eisner was very much opposed to this belief. In regard to the objective movement, Eisner could see the benefits and drawbacks of the movement's beliefs. Eisner believed there was a better method than objectives. Therefore, he created a theoretical and practical alternative for understanding and implementing instruction. He called it an expressive outcome instead of an objective. Also, Eisner began work in art education. He exposed beliefs that were untrue and challenged each of them. These beliefs included that children developed best in art if left to their own resources. Adults should not intervene in children's natural development. The major function of art education is to develop the children's general creativity through art. What's important in art education is process, not product. Children see the world more clearly than adults. Teachers should not attempt to evaluate work in art, since children's minds are qualitatively different from adults. Teachers should not attempt to talk about art, since verbalization usually kills art, and the belief that the best curriculum in art is one that simply provides children with the widest variety of materials for the creative exploration. One action Eisner took that challenged these beliefs was the creation of the Kettering Project, which aimed to develop an effective art curriculum supported by useful instructional materials for children of elementary age. Politically, there was a lot occurring during the time Eisner developed his educational philosophy. President Truman was leading the country until 1952, when Eisenhower took over as president. All the while, the Korean War was occurring. The fighting ended in Korea in 1953, and the Cold War was just beginning. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled segregation in public schools unconstitutional. In 1956, the interstate highway system began being constructed. The Vietnam War began, and Dadaism and pop art were emerging in the art world. Although a great deal was occurring while Eisner formed his educational philosophy, that didn't stop him from creating revolutionary ideas and making a name for himself in the education world. He has been at the forefront of many educational reforms, as well as helped reshape curriculum development and related themes. He taught that there was a cognitive nature to art. Eisner also developed new qualitative forms of research and educational evaluation. Eisner will always be remembered for being in the center of various controversial discussions on significant educational issues. As of 2003, he had written more than 270 articles and published 6 books on education. He is known for his eloquence with words, once described as a painter with words. He had the incredible ability to articulate both sides of arguments. Eisner fought for the arts to become a new kind of subject matter, understanding that they teach different ways of knowing. He also developed new conceptualizations of the educational field, creating 6 curriculum ideologies listed in the 3rd edition of his book, The Educational Imagination. They include religious orthodoxy, rational humanism, progressivism, critical theory, reconceptualization, and cognitive pluralism. Eisner had a beautiful power in his work, which was the ability to stimulate the imagination of educators, to see problems through different lenses, to entertain new possibilities, and to create fresh perspectives for the direction of their work. For this reason, he is the perfect man to be teaching collegiate-level courses on education. Eisner wrote on how teaching was an art in itself, and that this viewpoint could aid educators. He saw in art a celebration of sensibility and imagination. Eisner wrote, "Finally, if the arts celebrate anything, they celebrate sensibility and imagination. By sensibility, I mean that sheer pleasure of experiencing the qualitative world. By imagination, I mean the ability to take leave from the immediate and the immediately practical, and to allow oneself to consider what might be. Without attention to sensibility, to take leave from the immediate and immediately practical, and to allow oneself to consider what might be. Without attention to sensibility, the world itself is dimly known. It is sensibility that makes subtle the vivid. It is sensibility that makes possible what we normally regard as perceptivity. Indeed, sensibility is the first road to consciousness, and its refinement is an important human achievement. We give little attention to the development of the sensibilities in school. Imagination allows us to free ourselves from the press of the immediate, the practical, and the literal. It is through the imagination that new possibilities emerge. The arts put a premium on both. My educational passion is to make a genuine and significant place for such features of human capacity within our schools." Eisner also made great contributions to the curriculum field. One such contribution was unleashing the capacity for wonder. He believed fully that life itself could be a work of art, and that the arts could not be restricted to galleries, concert halls, and theaters. The arts cannot be contained. Their impact will overflow into everyday life. Eisner supported the idea that the arts should be a part of all classrooms. Interestingly, it was discovered that a curriculum rich in the arts leads to improved academic performance, generally speaking. A second argument Eisner held for bringing the arts into schools was that they diversified the forms of knowledge. Elliot also saw the importance of all the arts, from music to theater to dance to visual arts. Eisner became a messianic force in the policy-making world of education. He not only impacted education in the U.S., but the UK as well. Another wonderful thing Eisner is known for is the ability to point out means that have lost sight of their ends within education in the U.S. He did this with the war curriculum versus teaching. Eisner declared curriculum to be a mind-altering device, an agenda for the development of the mind. But he also stated that the agenda must be mediated to be brought into effect. therefore appeasing both parties involved and at the same time suggesting brilliant revolutionary ideas. Assessment is another area that Eisner impacted greatly. Elliot argued that a significant part of the problem with our assessment procedure is that operationalism and measurement have focused so heavily on behavior that the quality of students' experience have been generally ignored or seriously neglected. Eisner also recognized that the school atmosphere was influential in students' learning and more specifically their artistic development. It is no wonder that Eisner took so much effort to reform education and make it better when he saw schools as a platform from which to effect social change. He believed that schools should help students grow as individuals with unique ideas and cultures. He thought strongly that schools should not be factories of cultural reproduction. One major thing Eisner is remembered for is his creation of the 10 lessons the arts teach, which are written in his book, The Arts and the Creation of Mind. These 10 lessons are: the arts teach children to make good judgments about qualitative relationships. The arts teach children that problems can have more than one solution. The arts celebrate multiple perspectives. The arts teach children that in complex forms of problem solving, purposes are seldom fixed, but change with circumstances and opportunity. The arts make vivid the fact that neither words in their literal form nor numbers exhaust what we know. The arts teach students that small differences can have large effects. The arts teach students to think through and within material. The arts help children learn to say what cannot be said. The arts enable us to have experience we can have from no other source. The arts position in school curriculum symbolizes to the young what adults believe is important. In conclusion, I would like to share with you what Kieran Egan said about Eisner. We are fortunate indeed to have among us someone like Elliot Eisner, who recognizes the centrality of value in education, who has consistently used sound judgment and demonstrates to us how we might try to do the same, who is indeed one of the visionary minds in education today, and who has produced over the years an important body of persuasive arguments, and who is sensitive to the social forces and that shape our thinking, but is able also to recognize those forces for what they are and to transcend them.